Welcome back to another episode of the Gridiron Guys YouTube channel, and today we are going to be going over some of our sleepers or players we think that are going to outperform their current ADP for QB, wide receiver, running back, and tight end. And we're going to be starting with our one and only QB, and that is Jared Goff. Currently, Jared Goff has an ADP of 162 and QB 18. He's being drafted as a mid-tier backup, and we think that's just crazy. Last year, Goff threw for 22 or had 22 total touchdowns to 16 interceptions and finishes QB 13. He throws for a high volume of yards, and this year should be seeing an uptick in touchdowns because of the departure of Todd Gurley. Last year, the Rams ran for 20 touchdowns on the ground. If you give 10 of those touchdowns to Goff in the air, and you put that at 30 touchdowns for the year, or 32, Goff would be finishing as QB7, a mid-tier QB1 who's going to be giving you a high number of points with a pretty consistent weekly fantasy start because he throws for a lot of yards. So even if those touchdowns aren't there that week, the Rams are going to be a team that's going to be airing it out this year with Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson, two guys that are not going to be running for 200 yards a game. I think Goff's ADP can only be outperformed. I'd see no way in which he's finishing below ADP of 162 or QB 18. It's kind of crazy. I mean, Kevin, why are we so high on Jared Goff? Just continue to get into it.
Yeah, I really like Jared Goff's ADP and quarterback ranking. Obviously, he's not projected to be a starting quarterback for most fantasy leagues if you're considering 10 and 12-man leagues. But Jared Goff, like you said, the 20 remaining touchdowns that are going to be on the board for this year, at least like 7, 8 of them are going to go to passing, which is going to shoot his numbers up only even more. They got rid of Brandon Cooks. I'm not going to talk about it, but he was the worst fantasy pick I've ever had. Um, they add Van Jefferson. I think Tyler Higbee's going to have a great season. I like what the Rams are going to do. They're going to be passing the ball a lot this year, so his fantasy upside is huge. And if you're drafting him at QB 18 or 162, you're drafting him with basically not much hope, but the potential is there. So I really like him as he's also a late pick that I think you can be comfortable with. So if you don't want to waste a top pick on a quarterback and grab a receiver, running back, tight end, whatever, like I
Goff's your
think
guy late.
he's a great late round pick.
And not to mention, everyone's like, oh, the Rams are in for some regression. I think they already hit the lowest of the regression last year. Todd Gurley was awful last year. He just stole touchdowns. Cooper Kupp was out for a limited time, and Brandon Cooks was out for a decent amount of chunks of time. Robert Woods had a terrible season for the most part. I mean, their offense hit rock bottom, and Goff finished as a fringe QB1. This dude showed he can be an elite quarterback in the 2018-2019 season, where had some historic games. He had a game against Minnesota where he threw for like 500 yards and 5 touchdowns, I think, on Thursday night. He offers, honestly, like top QB1 projections going into defenses like when he's going to play Arizona. I think it's so smart to wait on a QB, and I think sometimes we're not that good of value later in rounds. But if Goff stays at QB 18 going into this year's draft, that's such a steal, and you're easily going to be outperforming his ADP this coming season. But now moving on to a running back that some people may not agree with us on, I think a lot are going to be hesitant to draft him, is David Johnson. Switching teams for the first time in his career, going to the Houston Texans. Johnson is for a new change of scenery after a very disappointing 2019 season. He's been injury plagued to say the least over the last 2 years, with surprisingly a lot of upper body injuries, wrist issues, just a bunch of maybe back I think was in there too for a little bit. But his efficiency was way down when he was on the field last year, averaging a measly 3.7 yards per carry, which is nowhere near his 5+ yards per touch he had when he was dominant back in the 2016-2017 days. And I think Johnson is due for a lot of touches this year on a much better offense than what he's been playing on. So even if he keeps that 3.7 yards per carry and he gets 275 touches with the vacated touches from Carlos Hyde, I think that's a 1,000-yard season. I think it's close to 10 touchdowns just because Houston's going to be much better offense. Deshaun Watson is an elite quarterback. I think the only thing that can out uh, make David Johnson's season not work out for him is the injuries. I think if he stays on the field for a full 16 games, the workload and the scoring opportunities will allow him to easily outperform his ADP of 35 and running back 19. And if he finds his groove and he gets back to those efficient days, David Johnson can be competing for top 3 to 5 running back in fantasy this year. It's all about him staying on the field. And I think if you're drafting him as an RB2, great. RB1, a little bit too much risk. But Kevin, what are you comfortable with David Johnson being for your running back 1 or 2?
I'm comfortable with drafting David Johnson in round 4. I think that's probably a good range for him. Uh, you got to look. A lot of teams are going into committee, running back committees, something like the Patriots have done for many years now. But this is not a case where there's a committee. So you can expect, as long as he stays healthy, he's going to be getting RB1 volume. They got rid of DeAndre Hopkins, obviously. Bill O'Brien's going to want to prove that this was a good trade. I would expect a lot of volume to David Johnson. That's why he's one of the best sleepers for this year. He's really only 1 or 2 years removed from an unreal top 5 fantasy player season. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was able to recreate that this year with all the volume he's going to get, because he's going to be involved in way more plays than he would be in Arizona. He was also hurt the past 2 years. You got to factor that in. He doesn't have much to prove, so the expectations are off his shoulders. I like David Johnson's situation. More importantly, I like him with Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Bill O'Brien made a ballsy trade, and I think he's going to make David Johnson the focal point of that offense. He knows for his job to be kept, David Johnson has to ball out this year, and I think he's going to do whatever he can to allow David Johnson to succeed. And I think he will be game planning him plays for him to get into the groove and find that old self, because David Johnson was one of the best players in the NFL come 2 years ago. It's hard to find a running back who's not only an extremely good runner, a great pass blocker, and a great pass protector, and altogether a great locker room guy. I think David Johnson has extreme upside this year, and this is the guy that does carry some risk. He's been injured the last 2 seasons, and he's not been on the field. But if you are trying to hit a home run pick here and win your league, getting David Johnson as an RB2, pairing with a guy like Saquon or Kamara, Zeke, McCaffrey, if he ends up doing what he did 3 years ago, you're gonna have two top 10 running backs, which is a recipe for success in fantasy. And now moving on to another guy who I think is another extremely undervalued running back is Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram finished as the RB8 last year. RB8. I think no one expected that coming into last year. I, for one, thought Mark Ingram was overvalued going onto a Ravens team that no one thought was going to be as good as it was. And not to mention, he finished at RB8, getting 48% of his team's touches, or being on the field, rather, for 48% of the plays. He's not on the field for half the plays. And people are worried about J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards cutting into his workload. He didn't have that big of a workload. He only had 202 carries. For a bell cow back, that's not a lot. Most bell cow backs get two, and he doesn't catch the ball really either. He like 202 touches. That's probably like 12, 13 a game around. And not to mention, he doesn't have to be on the field for a lot to do well. He has great touchdown potential and an elite offense with the MVP on it. And he finished as an RB1 last year. You can't knock the guy for being 30 because he hasn't shown any signs of decline. It doesn't make sense to me that he's ranked as RB24 when we saw how efficient he can be last year on such a limited workload. So even if J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards both get 100 carries and Ingram only gets 200 again, he's still going to have the exact same workload in which he finished as an RB8 last year. You're drafting him in the 5th round based on his ADP currently. If you get this guy in your flex, it's over. I mean, he can score 30 points in a week. What flex can do that? I mean, even in RB2, I think he offers high-end RB2 value. I think he's going to finish around running back 10 to 15 this year, if I was going to guess. I think he has great potential for an RB1, and I think he's a safe pick. Unlike David Johnson, who's a bit higher price tag with a bit more upside, I think Mark Ingram is a safe pick to outperform his ADP, and I think he won't really go much below if he has a bad season because of that scoring opportunities in that Baltimore offense.
Yeah, I agree. I think Mark Ingram is way undervalued on most lists, and that's probably because J.K. Dobbins. But I don't think J.K. Dobbins is going to have a huge role this year. I think he's going to take a backseat for probably this year because Mark Ingram isn't a contract year. They're probably going to let him go after this year. So we're going to see what happens there. But Mark Ingram has a lot in the tank still, and I think he's going to be able to be a big part of the offense this year. Maybe he doesn't have 48% of the snaps, but I think he still gets around 40. So even there, if he's not finishing RB8, he's probably going to finish as a high-end RB2, like you said. And if you can get him for a flex, you just might have won your fantasy league.
Yeah, and I was number crunching, looking at some of the stats from last year. So Mark Ingram scored 15 touchdowns, which is a lot. People may say he's in for some positive regression. Well, if he scored 5 less touchdowns, 10 touchdowns in the year, which is a very reasonable mark for this coming season, he would have finished as RB12, still an RB1 by taking away 5 touchdowns. That just shows you that Mark Ingram is not only a safe pick, he has a high upside. You're not risking a lot, and there's a lot to gain. It's such an easy draft pick. And you may think, oh, he's getting old. Oh, J.K. Dobbins, the new young runners to pair with Lamar. I can tell you this guy is not going anywhere. He's on a contract year. He's going to be running hard. Baltimore is going back with a lot to prove after a disappointing playoff exit. I think at very least you're getting an RB2 out of Ingram, a low end RB2. I think it's a great pick. But now we are moving on to, I think, my favorite sleeper that we have found so far is Devante Parker. This guy is extremely slept on. Before I even get into it, I'm just going to say he finished as wide receiver 6 last year. That's right, wide receiver 6. In front of guys behind him were Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, and DeAndre Hopkins. He doesn't get the respect he deserves, and that's largely because he's been a disappointment for multiple years of his career. He was a high first-round pick back in the day, and he's really been mediocre for so many years. But last year, I don't know what clicked with him. He started balling out. And that wasn't just against garbage time teams in the end of the fourth quarter. My favorite stat that I found when I was looking at Devante Parker is against the Bills and the Patriots. They play him 4 times. 2 best corners in the league, Tre'Davious White, Stephon Gilmore, both matched up with him. In those 4 games, he finished with 20 catches for 327 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's against these are lockdown corners. Gilmore probably didn't give up 300 yards the entire season. Tre'Davious White had, I think, 8 interceptions, and he put up starting fantasy numbers against the best in the game. I mean, he balled out with Fitzpatrick last year, and I understand people may think that Tua may get in there and it may affect him, but I think Fitzpatrick's at least good for the first 4 to 6 games. And if you're scared about Tua coming in and him not being as good, he will have really high trade value because I expect him to get to an extremely hot start. I mean, he's valued at wide receiver 26 last year, which is a low end wide receiver 2 to a flex depending on how big your league is. And I think he's a safe pick. He didn't have that high of a target share last year. He's around 100. I think Fitz is going to play a lot of games, and I think he's finally found his groove and he's ready to ball out once again and prove he deserves a big contract. Kevin, I mean, where do you think Devontae Parker's going to finish? What wide receiver ranking for next
Ooh,
year?
that's a tough question because, like you said, the quarterback play is you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I personally think Fitzpatrick's going to start the first 4 to 6 weeks, or I don't know when their bye is, but maybe he takes over up until their bye and then they let Tua start. But I think regardless, Fitzpatrick's going to force feed him the ball because he's undoubtedly the most talented receiver in Miami. I think there was a quote that Stephon Gilmore said last year. Devontae Parker gave me the biggest struggle. Either him or John Brown, I don't remember. But it doesn't matter. Devontae Parker balled out. The stats show against Stephon Gilmore and Tre'Davious White, the 2 all-pro first-team corners from last year. So I want to say Devontae Parker, at worst, I think he'll finish where he's ranked. So I really don't think there's much of a downside to drafting him. I think it's only improvement. Because as a wide receiver 1, he's going to get a ton of target share. I would say he's probably going to wind up
Ex-
around the like. I can't say he's going to finish top six again because you just don't know. But I'd say he's going to finish probably around 12, 13. If I had to take a guess, I think that's a pretty fair upside. I like his upside though because as a number one receiver, there like being that he's wide receiver number 26, there's not going to be a lot of number one receivers right there. And a guy like Fitzmagic who loves to throw the ball deep, it's a home run hit. I mean, he has so much potential and he's just getting started. So who knows? Maybe he'll be like the next Chris Godwin this year. I could definitely see it. Just really blow
exactly,
up
and I
again.
think the big thing. I think the big thing with Parker is he's not that high of a draft pick. This is a guy you're drafting fifth round, sixth round. You can take. There's not that much risk, and I think there's so much
Not
upside.
much risk, a
Even if you
lot of
have doubts
reward.
in Tua, I think if Tua comes into play, that means that Miami thinks he's good enough to play better than Fitz is because Brian Flores is a guy that got a lot out of his team last year, and I think he's expecting to go into the season and win games. I don't think Miami's going to sacrifice their season if Tua is not playing well. I think if he plays like crap, he's going to get the court, get the yank, and Fitz will go right back in. I wouldn't really worry about the QB play. I just think that the touches are there. I think Parker's hit his stride, and I think he's going to easily outperform his ADP. The numbers show it, especially against the top tier talent. It wasn't a fluke year. He wasn't eating on like the backup corners. He played
Yeah,
well against elite NFL
he was
defenses.
getting
That's what sold
he
him
was
for me.
getting double teamed a lot too, and he's still jumping, winning every single aggressive catch. I also was looking at the stats when Fitzpatrick was in versus Rosen. Even with Josh Rosen, he was putting up solid stats, but when Fitzpatrick came in, there was a noticeable uptick in his volume and catch like basically his shares and targets. But also another like I know this isn't Devante Parker, but Preston Williams is also a great late sleeper. You could probably get in a second to last round, something like that. He'll be a late round pick, same type of thing.
Yeah, I'd agree. The Miami receivers are very slept on because
They're young,
no one expects much from that
very
offense.
young.
Exactly. And they have no fantasy relevance in years past, so that's why you're getting a nice drafts pick for those players. But moving on to a veteran player, one of the few veterans on this list, we have Emmanuel Sanders as our next sleeper at wide receiver. Currently, Sanders is ranked at wide receiver 39 with an ADP of 102. So he's genuinely being drafted as a late flex or a bench player in most leagues. And I think that is great value for a guy that just got a complete upgrade at QB, offense, targets, everything. On the Saints, I think Sanders offers a much safer week to week floor because on the 49ers, they had some games where they just stopped passing in the second half. The Saints are going to be in a bunch of shootouts this year, putting up 30, 40 points multiple weeks. Sanders is sliding right into that wide receiver two role, and I think it's an uptick in targets. I'm certain of it. He had 98 targets last year. Michael Thomas had 185. That's almost double what
That's
Sanders saw last year.
ridiculous.
I think Michael Thomas will cut down his targets to like 160 and Sanders will go up to like 120, 130. And if Sanders sees an uptick in targets to 120, 130, I think it's a reasonable fantasy line that he has 80 catches on 120 targets for 1,000 to 1,100 yards, let's say, and 8 touchdowns. That would finish him as a wide receiver 11 and or wide receiver 13 in PPR. I mean, those stats aren't unreasonable. Look at the Saints passing game. Drew Brees might throw for 4,000, 5,000 yards this year. Where is that going besides Michael Thomas and Jared Cook? It's not going to many other receivers in that team. I don't think it's outlandish for Sanders to catch 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. That's shooting for high standards. If he gets 808 touchdowns or 7 touchdowns, that dude is still outperforming wide receiver 39. And the big thing here is I understand why people last year were skeptical of Sanders because you might play him in a game where San Fran plays, I don't know, Arizona, and you expect him to do great because Arizona's a bad defense. But San Fran's up 30 to nothing and they're not going to score. He's not going to get the ball. But the Saints are always going to be in games that are closer because their defense is not as elite. And I think Sanders, he could struggle to find his way some weeks, but I think overall he will easily outperform wide receiver 39. I like him as a wide receiver too, most weeks, I'm going to say this year. It's very strong flex too.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a solid flex play with he's a reasonable wide receiver number two. My only concerns with him are that there's a lot of mouths to feed in New Orleans, but if you look, they lost Ted Ginn. I mean, Traquan Smith's gonna hit the bench, but Jared Cook, Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, hell, even Taysom Hill, plus Emmanuel Sanders. That's a lot of targets, so you got to be skeptical of that. But still, being that he's a wide receiver number two who has the talent of a wide receiver number one, he's going to get a lot of open looks. Defenses are going to cater towards stopping Michael Thomas, so you got to look for Emmanuel Sanders to get open. He kills on the double move too, which is something that Drew Brees loves to hit. So you got to be careful, or you got to be knowledgeable about that. I love Emmanuel Sanders' upside this year. I think he greatly outperforms wide receiver 39, and I think he's a late round pick that is going to boom. I also like the fact that New Orleans finally, because I feel like for years they've been talking about how they need a counterpart to a number one wide receiver, and I think this is the year they finally got it.
Yeah, exactly. I think this Michael Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders duo is going to be unstoppable this year. And if I may add, I think a lot of people forget Emmanuel Sanders started on Denver last year. He got traded to San Fran in the middle of the year, and he played really well for a new scene. San Fran has a really weird offense, probably something he's not used to, more of a downfield passing attack, which he played with in Pittsburgh and Denver. And he played well last year. He outperformed wide receiver 39 last year. And if you think he's still got some stuff left in the tank, and I think we all do after watching San Fran play in the playoffs, especially towards the end of the year, I thought Sanders had some great games. He's going to outperform wide receiver 39. It's just how much does he do that by? I'm shocked his ADP is 100 too. He's getting drafted around guys that are unproven, like Sterling Shepard coming off 3 concussions the last 3 years, Terry McLaurin around there, Darius Slate and Jamison Crowder. These are guys that he should easily be able to outperform, and I'm very confident he will do so. But now we were moving on to our one tight end sleeper. And I'm not going to lie, it was hard to find a tight end sleeper because in a limited group of players, their rankings are usually more accurate. But we both really like Hayden Hurst this year. And it's a lot of risk with him because you can't rely solely on Hayden Hurst because he might go to Atlanta and just fizzle out because he's never shown much in his career. But this is solely projected on opportunity meeting talent. And I think with the departure of Austin Hooper and Mohamed Sanu, that leaves 186 vacated targets in that Atlanta offense. And I think Hayden Hurst is going to come in there and likely get around, I would say, 80 targets. And if he receives 80 targets, I can assure you he will outperform tight end 17. No matter how bad he plays, 80 targets. He catches half of those for 500, 600 yards and 5 touchdowns. I was looking at some of the stats for tight ends last year. If Hayden Hurst finished with 687 yards this year and 5 touchdowns, he would finish as tight end 8. For 80 targets playing an entire year, this guy does not get injured. I think tight end 17, even if you're drafting him as a backup tight end, which some people may be, depending on if he falls, he has such high upside. And tight ends, it's so hard to find. And even the top guys disappoint so often. Last year, George Kittle had a horrendous start, picked it up at the end of the year, but still, from a top pick, you can't have that. Evan Ingram, you don't know if the guy's going to put up a tight end 1 season or tight end 12 season. Hunter Henry hasn't been on the field at all. Darren Waller, is he a 1-year wonder?
No.
These are all guys who carry extremely high risk tight end position other than Kelsey and Ertz, I would say. And I think even getting one of those top guys and pairing him with a backup of Hayden Hurst, it's great because he offers trade value because there's always someone who needs a tight end in the end of the year. And I think this draft pick is based on, as I mentioned before, targets and his draft position. You're not going to be drafting a guy at tight end 17 who has 100 target potential to 70 target potential. It's just great value. It's simple as that.
Yeah, I agree. I think Hayden Hurst is going to be a steal. He's probably not going to get drafted in many leagues, but there's a lot of targets to feed in Atlanta. That's why we're saying like Calvin Ridley's probably gonna have a good season. He's probably gonna get some targets, but Austin Hooper leaving after putting up top 10 tight end numbers in Atlanta because Matt Ryan loves tight ends. I think even if Hayden Hurst has like a 600-yard season, he's probably still gonna have around 40 receptions right there. That's 100 PPR points, probably like 5, 6 touchdowns even. Like that's a quality tight end, especially if you're gonna go out and like waiver wire tight ends. I mean, two other tight ends while I'm at it that you could also look up that were some solid sleepers were John U. Smith and what's his name? Johnny Smith and oh man, that's bothering me.
But besides the point, I
Yeah,
think
oh Will
going
Disley.
back to
Will Disley.
Hurst, yeah, Will Dudley's another good sleeper. But besides the point, people might think Hurts has no talent. He didn't do anything in his last two
First round
years.
pick.
Exactly. I was about to add. He was a first round pick. The guy has talent. He may not be a pass catching first tight end, but he's gonna be on the field a lot. And I think, as I mentioned before, there's gonna be a ton of targets. And he doesn't have to do much to outperform his ADP in tight end 17. Those targets are going to come. He's going to catch some passes. He'll get some easy scoring opportunities. Hurst is great value despite not knowing what you're going to get out of him. It's as simple as that. And now moving on to our last sleeper we currently have 2 months prior to most drafts is our flex spot of Jamison Crowder. Crowder has an ADP of 86 and he is ranked wide receiver 41. And this one is simple. Jamison Crowder is not that sexy draft pick. You're going to want to try to find that guy to win your league, the next Chris Godwin or breakout running back. It's just not the case. This is a guy who is going to get 120 targets. He saw 122 last year. Going to catch 5, 6 passes a game and get you 60 yards every single week. That is an extremely solid flex play. You're getting him at a great value. Last year, he finished as wide receiver 26 in PPR, wide receiver 34 in standard. You're getting him at wide receiver 41 right now with his current ADP. And last year, he finished at those wide receiver rankings with Robbie Anderson. There is no Robbie Anderson last year. This year, you have a Denzel Mims, who's never played an NFL snap, and Brashad Perriman, who I don't think's caught 100 NFL passes. So just that alone gives Crowder more of a target share likely than last year. And if he puts it the same year as last year, he's still outperforming his ADP. Not to mention, the Jets' offense really has nowhere to go but up. Last year, Sam Darnold had mono. He missed some time. They struggled really badly in the beginning of the year. Crowder played better towards the end of the season. I mean, if he gets some better QB play, that'll be some more touchdowns for him, maybe some more yards. The targets are there. No one's going to take those targets. And I think wide receiver 41 is way too low for him. I like him as a solid flex play next year.
Yeah, I do too. I like him as a flex player. Uh, Jameson Crowder eats targets for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I I feel like every time I watch the Jets play, he's just getting force fed by Sam Darnold for like 9 catches, 50 yards, and a touchdown. He's not going to put up a ton of yards, but he'll get the catches. As a PPR player, I think he has a lot more value than he does in standard, but still, he's a red zone threat for Sam Darnold too. Him and Darnold just have a nice connection that I like, especially having lost Robbie Anderson. Like you said, a lot of targets to go around. I think Brashad Perriman and Denzel Mims are very similar players. We're going to run the same routes, both looking to go deep. Um, so I would just expect a lot of Jameson Crowder, like dink and dunk type of passes. He's going to be a late round pick, but he'll be solid for you in fantasy. Great bench player. If you can get him for a bench, that's a solid pickup.
Exactly. As I mentioned earlier, this guy's going to be consistent every single week. If you have a starter go out to injury, he's a great fill and play. And I think his matchup won't really matter throughout the season playing in the slot. You're going to get those easy, nice 5 yard outs, 5 yard slants, quick catches. I mean, if the Jets break out, I don't really think they will this year. If Sam Darnold has a career year, Crowder will have an even better finish. He'll be that security blanket in the middle of the field because they don't have a tight end. I mean, this is an easy pick, and it's going to be a safe pick, I think, too. And that's our last sleeper for our quote unquote sleeper team. These are all guys who I'd love to have in my roster, especially with their current value. They're all undervalued. I think they're all going to outperform their ADP, and they're just great draft picks with their current ADP. But they can change though, so make sure when you're watching this video, when you're drafting, you're not drafting them at a much higher ADP than we have them projected at now. Because it's what we have them projected at now, but that's subject to change. But make sure to like and subscribe. Let us know who your favorite sleepers are if you agree with our sleepers. And stay tuned for probably next week. We're going to be putting out our all bust team and going over guys who we think are just way too overvalued and guys you got to steer clear from in this year's fantasy draft. Make sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for next week's video.